The story takes place in a remote area of the UK, but to protect the people involved, I won't say the exact location. My friend Zara, a British Pakistani influencer, had just recently had her second child, and her husband had gone away on a golf holiday, leaving her alone with the 2 children. She was used to being left alone, as her husband often worked away from home too, and would often go away on vacation with his friends, leaving her alone to take care of the children. It was a stormy October night and there was lots of thunder, so it was pretty noisy. She started to feel uncomfortable as it was getting dark early and her house is fairly isolated. So all the noise from outside was, well, getting to her. At around 9 p.m., she had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The children were asleep and Zara was making sure the house was locked up for the night. She went back into the kitchen and she saw that the back door was slightly open. She started to approach it, but then felt very dizzy, stumbling, and she fainted. Zara slowly regained consciousness and sat on a chair in the kitchen. The first thing she was aware of was how heavily she was breathing through her nose. She felt something covering her mouth, and after twisting her lips, she realized it was sticky tape that was sealing her lips. Zara started to panic and tried to talk and shout, but the gag around her mouth was preventing this. She struggled to move as well, as she could feel her hands were taped together behind the chair, and when she looked down, she was duct taped to the chair and her feet were taped together as well. Her hard breathing popped the duct tape covering her mouth in and out. Then the lamp over her head switched on. Standing there before her was a medium-built man with a hood on and a scarf covering his lower face. At this point, Zara was obviously petrified and was mainly concerned for her 2 children sleeping upstairs. The man then said,
"I won't hurt you, but do you keep money in the house?"
Zara mumbled a "no" against the tape. The man had a large bag which he had filled with items such as Dubai jewelry from around the house. The next thing he said sent a chill up Zara's back.
"Don't worry, your kids are still asleep."
He then went to leave through the back kitchen door, and before exiting turned and said,
"I just want you to know I'm sorry for this."
Then he left. Zara struggled for a few minutes and then eventually freed her mouth from the tape by twisting her mouth and biting on the tape. She immediately ran to check on her children who had both slept through the entire ordeal. She phoned the police and the man was eventually apprehended later that week. As mentioned, Zara has an online presence, so the man was aware of this and was aware that she was often left alone. He admitted to gaining entry to the back door and drugged her coffee, which explains why she fainted. The burglar said that he had lost his business and was in a desperate situation with the state of the economy, but that he didn't wish to harm anyone. Zara bears a strong resemblance to Kim Kardashian, and the fact that she's a micro-influencer is likely what gave him this idea, as a similar situation happened with Kim Kardashian just a few years earlier. Zara is a very strong, feisty young woman, so she did eventually learn to live with the situation. However, it's not something you can ever fully recover from. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the man who did this, but the feeling she had when she was in that position is something she'll never forget. Mid-fall of last year, I agreed to a babysitting gig, as I'm known around my neighborhood as a relatively available person to watch kids. I personally don't really love kids, but I definitely think it's fun to be a mom for a couple of hours. I went over at around 3 to meet the parents and children who lived a few minutes away from me. I had to drive there as the road to connect our streets wasn't finished, so I couldn't walk like I wanted to. This is important to the story. I walked up to the door and was welcomed in, and the family was kind, of course. 3 children, 2 older kids and a toddler who I can't remember the specific ages of, but it's not too important. The parents eventually headed out to the sports game they were going to, which I was aware was going to be several hours as they were also going to the bar after the game. So their plan was to arrive at 11 to 11:30 p.m., which was fine with me as I tend to stay up later than that anyways. The first few hours are normal. I make them dinner and we head to the basement to play and watch some movies like any other babysitter would do. It started to get dark and time had slipped my mind. And as I went back upstairs, I had realized how late it had gotten because the house was quite literally more windows than walls. The house had a daylight basement, so yes, there were windows downstairs, but I was facing away from them, so I didn't see the sky fade into the nighttime. I went upstairs and checked every single window in the house, as well as all the locks, closets, and any spot where someone could be hiding, as I'm extremely paranoid. And I also like to check for the kids because they had also mentioned me needing to scare the monsters away, which is how most kids tell you they're scared. But I was also scared, of course. I want to mention that I'm in the top 4% of viewers for Southern Cannibal, and I was thinking of this channel when the attempted break-in took place. Anyways, I cleared the house of any creepers and I went back downstairs to get everyone changed and ready for bed. As I was wrapping up, I had heard some neighbors' dogs howling, which I wasn't too concerned about as I've babysat and pet sat for the dogs and kids in that neighborhood. And I knew it wasn't too much to be concerned about since there are foxes all over the yard since there's lots of fields and hills where I live at. I finished everything and took everyone in for bedtime and head upstairs to go have a snack since it was about 9:45 and I hadn't had dinner with the kids because I didn't want to eat all their food. And I figured I'd just wait so I could raid the pantry without them asking for chips or a soda too. My favorite part of being a babysitter is of course the free food. As I headed upstairs, I immediately remembered that I'd completely forgotten to lock the front door as I was so worried about checking everything else, so I quickly walked to the door and locked it. It's a modern lock, the type that you need to put a code in, but there was also a top lock for extra security, which probably saved me from a horrific night. The windows around the door are the frosty type for privacy, so I couldn't see any distinct figures, but I noticed that there was nothing abnormal out there. I walked to the bathroom to then let out my poop I had been holding in for hours at that point. Sorry guys, but when you gotta go, you gotta go. The bathroom is almost directly behind the front door but slightly to the side, so from the bathroom door I had a straight view onto the porch steps and a little bit of the rest of the front yard, but again no distinct figures, just blobs. I finished doing my poop, which took me a few minutes as I scrolled on Instagram Reels longer than I actually shat. I opened the door and immediately I was so grateful that I had just gone to the restroom as I for sure would have shit myself in that moment if I hadn't. I see a figure outside the door and I freeze in case they can see me too moving inside. I watch as they slowly cup up their hands against the side window and I see it's a darker skinned man, which will be important in a moment. I watched him walk back down the steps and luckily I had turned every light off in the home. So maybe he thought there was nobody there since my car was parked across the street, so it didn't look like any cars were actually at the house I was in. As I see him move away, I go to look out the peephole of the door, and I see him cross the street, do the same thing to my car, and try the door handles. Within a few minutes, he wanders off down into the street out of sight. There's an old folks' home near the houses, and I assumed it was possibly a confused elder, which has happened before in this area. I make sure everything is locked again and I go to the pantry to then grab some food when I turn around and see the little boy had come upstairs and said he saw someone in the backyard, and my heart damn near stopped. I said it was just a tree or bush moving in the wind, and he was definitely partially awake, as when I walked him downstairs to his bed again to tuck him in, he was passed out in seconds. I then close all the curtains all the way down again when I see shoe prints in the mud by the back sliding door. The backyards in this area are rarely ever finished since the houses are all new, so most of the landscapes are half grass, half dirt from the construction. I realized the man had probably scoped out the downstairs first and seen nothing going on and then moved upstairs to the door. I checked the peephole upstairs to see slight mud prints on the front porch where my suspicion was confirmed. As I'm looking, I see the man emerge from the side of the garage again, and my stomach turns with disgust. But he kept walking through the yards of the neighborhood, which I found extremely odd. I was thinking of calling the police, but technically he hasn't done anything wrong other than loitering maybe, but there's no cameras to see how long he's been on the property. Plus, I didn't want to ruin the parents' night and make them come home early. I continued eating my snack in the kitchen on the floor, in the most private area of this completely windowed house where it was impossible to hide, when I hear the sound of the electric lock buzzing. There's a specific sound when the door is successfully unlocked, and to my horror, it makes that damn sound. I stop breathing as I crawl out of the corner and grab the first thing I see, which is a serrated knife I had used to cut up some bread earlier for sandwiches. I then realized I had slid the top lock over, which prevented anyone from opening the door anyways when I could still hear this freak trying to enter the house. I walked to the guest bedroom to get a better view. The front door is tucked between the guest room and garage on each side, so there was a window on the very front of the guest room that gave me a good view of the porch to see the man. This guy had the worst skin I had ever seen. Not related to his color, of course, but there were deep marks from what looked like picking needles and who knows what else. I see his hair. It's these extremely grown out locks, dirty hands covered in mud, and finally, no shoes. I was peeking through the blinds so the man didn't see me. As his feet were pressed up towards the bottom of the door, I quickly crawled to the door again, and as quickly as I could tried to cut the rubber seal off the door that keeps the weather out. As I get it off, I shove the knife under the door and start going back and forth, and I hear him run off. I immediately told the parents, and they were already heading home, and I decided to explain to them what happened and why their door has no way to keep out the door air now. I have no clue what this man's intentions were, or if I actually got him with the knife. Months later, I saw on the news of my city that a man had been charged for drug trafficking and attempted burglary in my city on other homes. I know it's wrong to keep this to myself, but I have zero evidence of this actually happening, as the family hadn't set up any cameras anywhere, and neither had the neighbors since these homes were new and nobody thought to install them or get a Ring camera, which is weird because in today's world, I would never go without cameras at every entrance of my own house. I hope nobody else was seriously harmed, and I hope the man has received the proper punishments and/or mental help he needs. I ended up getting paid extra, but I also never got to have the snacks that I'd been eyeing down the whole evening before this disaster. Thanks for sharing all these stories to help people be more aware. It's truly helped me learn how to keep myself safe in my own home by setting up the proper alarms and cameras, and also how to recognize weird or odd behaviors from others. Happy holidays, everyone. Hi, everyone. This happened several years ago, and for a long time I stopped talking about it altogether. Not because it didn't matter anymore, because people tend to respond with hindsight instead of empathy. They ask what you should have done without understanding how fear rewires your brain in the moment. But I think people hearing this will understand. So here it is. At the time, I was living in a second-floor apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a quiet area, the kind of place where neighbors waved politely but kept to themselves. I worked as a medical assistant in a small clinic, and my schedule usually had me home by early evening. That afternoon, I came home just after 5 p.m. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it close behind me with a dull click. I tossed my purse on the counter, set my phone beside it, and kicked off my shoes. I didn't bother locking the door, something I'd done countless times before without a second thought. My partner was supposed to be home within the hour away. That habit ended that day. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, sorting laundry and half listening to the hum of the traffic outside. I was in the middle of hanging up clothes when I had heard the front door open. I smiled instinctively and called out, "Hey, I'm back here." There was no response. That uneasy feeling, the one you can't quite explain, settled in immediately. I stepped out of the bedroom and into the living room. Someone was standing near the kitchen counter. He wasn't masked. He wasn't holding anything. He was just there. A man that I had never seen before, older than me, watching me silently like I had surprised him. For a brief foolish moment, I wondered if he had the wrong apartment. That thought vanished when he didn't apologize or move. I raised my voice and I told him immediately that he needed to leave. I tried to sound confident, tried to make myself bigger than I felt. He didn't react. Instead, he reached down and picked up my phone, then my wallet, then my keys. One by one, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. That was when panic really took over. The only other way I could contact anyone was my laptop sitting on the desk by the window. I rushed toward it, grabbed it, and ran past him toward the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as I heard footsteps behind me. Within seconds, the handle rattled. I ran into the closet, locked that door too, and dropped to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't open the laptop. I logged into the first messaging app I could think of and sent frantic messages to my partner, begging him to call the police. He replied quickly. He said help was on the way. He said that he was leaving work also. I sat there, knees pulled into my chest, listening. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps moved closer. The closet door shook violently, then stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. I didn't fight. I was frozen completely, utterly frozen, convinced that if the door gave way, that would be the end. Now, usually when people hear this part, they often ask why I didn't do more. I don't have a satisfying answer. Fear doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The noises moved away. I heard things breaking, cabinets opening, glass shattering. Time stretched and warped until I had no idea how long I'd been there. I messaged my mother. She lived states away. I told her I loved her. I asked her to keep replying even if I couldn't respond right away. I didn't want to be alone. Eventually, the front door opened again, this time followed by shouting. I recognized my partner's voice. Moments later, everything blurred. I remember the intruder being restrained. I remember sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I remember the police lights through the windows. The officers arrived way later than I expected, though I know fear distorts time. They took the man away, and I got my belongings back. I answered questions mechanically. As one officer was leaving, he told me that I should always lock my door. At the time, it felt like blame. Later, I just understood it was experience speaking. The incident itself lasted less than an hour. The aftermath lasted years. Even after we moved to a quieter town, to a safer building, to a place with only one entrance, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt threatening. Every night felt like I was waiting for something terrible to just happen again. Eventually, I realized that the fear wasn't about where I lived. It was about how helpless I still felt. So I did something uncomfortable. I walked into a self-defense studio and signed up. At first, I stayed quiet. I stood in the back. I avoided attention. But over time, slowly and deliberately, I rebuilt something I thought I'd lost forever. My confidence, control, trust in myself. I've trained for years now. The person I was in that closet still exists, but she no longer defines me. I don't judge her anymore. She survived the only way she knew how, and now I know more. If you've experienced something like this and you still feel haunted by it, I want you to know you're not weak and you're not broken. Healing doesn't look the same for everyone, and there's no timeline for it. Thank you all for listening. If sharing this helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it. Stay safe. This is still the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. What haunts me isn't just what occurred, but how narrowly I avoided something far worse. Sometimes I replay it in my head and realize that a single different choice, a single second longer, and I might not be here to tell this story at all. This happened about 4 years ago. It was when I was in my early 20s and still in university. On paper, my life was stable. I lived in a quiet neighborhood most people considered safe, tree-lined streets, families out walking in the evenings, nothing that ever made the news. I shared a modest apartment with my younger cousin, and we had an aging spoiled cat who believed the entire building belonged to him. Growing up, I'd always loved combat sports. I wasn't exceptional, but I was committed. I trained in whatever was available. Boxing, jiu-jitsu, a bit of karate, anything that taught me discipline and awareness. Training gave me confidence in my body and my reactions. But when I moved to the city for school, reality took over. Long commutes, endless coursework, late nights. Slowly, training slipped out of my routine until it became something I told myself I'd get back to someday. Our apartment just sat above ground level. The back of the building faced a neglected strip of greenery, a tangled mess of trees and brush that separated our building from an old service road. There was a narrow metal staircase attached to our kitchen balcony that led straight down into the shadows. It wasn't something I liked to think about, but we always kept that door locked. Always, except when the cat wanted out. My days were exhausting. I left home late in the morning and often didn't return until after dark. So when a friend offered to drive me home one evening, cutting my commute in half, I was relieved. I arrived much earlier than usual, just as the sky was dimming into dusk. The building felt strangely still. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and called out my cousin's name out of habit. No answer. This wasn't unusual. He was often out and doing things. But something about the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was so tense. Only one lamp was on near the entryway. The rest of the apartment was dark. I remember pausing, my hand still on the door, listening. Nothing. Yet my stomach tightened, that familiar instinctive warning that something wasn't right. I moved slowly down the hallway toward the bedrooms. That's when I heard it. A door slammed, hard enough to echo throughout the apartment. It came from my cousin's room. At first, my mind scrambled for a normal explanation. You know, maybe he'd been showering and just panicked when he heard me come in. Maybe he was playing some kind of a prank. But then I heard voices, low hurried whispers, not playful, not familiar. They sounded urgent, pressed. My heart started pounding. I became painfully aware of every sound I made, the creak on the floor, my own breathing. Before I reached his door, I glanced into my bedroom. It looked like a bomb had gone off. My drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered everywhere. Books lay face down on the floor. My desk was bare, as if someone had swept everything off of it in one violent motion. That was the moment everything clicked. Someone had been inside my home. Fear didn't freeze me, it flipped a switch. I didn't think. I didn't calculate risks. My body just moved before my brain could catch up. I slammed my shoulder into my cousin's bedroom door with everything I had. The door burst open. The room was empty but destroyed. Mattress askew, closet torn apart, belongings strewn everywhere. Whoever had been whispering moments ago was gone. I sprinted toward the kitchen, adrenaline roaring in my ears, and threw open the balcony door. Just in time, I saw a man scrambling down the metal staircase. He stumbled when he hit the ground, almost collapsing before regaining his balance. He looked ordinary. That's what terrified me most. No mask, no weapon, just a regular man who had been rifling through my life moments earlier. I screamed, raw, furious, wordless, and he bolted into the darkness beyond the trees. He was gone. The adrenaline drained fast, replaced by shaking panic. Then I realized what was missing. It was my laptop. I tore through the apartment in a frenzy, sobbing, pulling things apart that were already destroyed. Now, that laptop wasn't just an object. It held my schoolwork, my personal files, my connection to my friends that I talked to every day. Losing it felt like I was losing my footing entirely. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my hands numb. I called my mom. I don't remember what I said, only that she kept asking me to slow down. Later, she told me that my words were all jumbled, switching languages mid-sentence without warning. The police arrived eventually. They asked questions, took notes. I looked around. Their presence felt hollow, like a formality rather than protection. That's when we found it. A pillowcase stuffed with our belongings abandoned in the chaos. Both laptops, jewelry, and old electronics. Inches away from where I'd been searching, unseen because my mind was still spiraling. Nothing ever came out of the investigation. We removed the staircase and installed motion lights. I tried to rebuild a sense of safety, but something fundamental had shifted. For months afterward, every shadow made my muscles tense. Every unfamiliar face near my bus stop sparked irrational fear and anger. I caught myself scanning crowds, replaying the scene, imagining what I would do if I ever saw that man again. Eventually, we moved, and I went back to training. Not because I believed I could overpower danger, but because I refused to live feeling helpless. Training grounded me. It gave me some kind of control over my breath, my reactions, and my fear. It reminded me that strength doesn't disappear, it just waits to be reclaimed. Sometimes I still think about that awful night, about how thin that door was, how easily my blind courage could have gotten me killed. And yet, if I'm honest, I know myself. I probably would have charged in anyway. To whoever decided my home was an easy target, you took something away from me that night. my sense of safety, but you didn't take my resolve. And if our paths ever cross again, I promise you I won't be the same person you ran from.